If nobody believes my dad is innocent, then I'll make them believe.
The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, their creak echoing like thunder. All eyes turned at once. A girl barely 16 walked in with trembling hands, yet there was fire in her eyes. Her name was Aaliyah Johnson, and she wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't a lawyer, not even close, but when life steals away the person you love most, sometimes courage becomes your only weapon. Up at the front sat the judge, tall, stern, resting his gavel beside a mountain of papers. The air in the courtroom was suffocating, charged with whispers. Photographers clicked rapidly, capturing every tense second, as if they knew history was about to unfold. The bailiff's voice rang out. Case number 3, the people versus Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson, Aaliyah's father, a man with worn, calloused hands and a smile that once lit up the darkest nights, but today, he sat shackled, his head bowed, accused of a crime Aaliyah knew deep in her heart he did not commit. Around her, lawyers in crisp suits traded smug glances. Reporters scribbled in their notebooks, already convinced of the outcome. To them, Robert wasn't a man. He was a headline, a story, a poor mechanic accused of something far bigger than himself. In their eyes, guilty was the only word that fit. But to Aaliyah, he was her entire world. She clenched her fists as the prosecutor smirked at her father like a hunter eyeing wounded prey. She whispered in her heart, "They don't know him. They don't know the truth. But I do." The judge cleared his throat, ready to begin the hearing. That was the moment Aaliyah stepped forward. Her legs shook, her hands trembled, but her voice, though shaky, rang out across the silent courtroom like a bell. "Your Honor," she said, "I'll prove my dad is innocent." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge raised his eyebrows in surprise. Lawyers leaned toward each other, whispering in disbelief. Who was this girl, standing in the face of the law itself, daring to challenge the system? It was reckless, it was impossible, and it was inspiring. The judge leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Young lady, this is highly irregular, but I will allow you to speak." The room exploded with murmurs. Aaliyah had no law degree, no training, no allies in this room of power. But she had something more dangerous: unshakable belief. Belief that her father was a good man. Belief that truth mattered. Belief that she could fight, even if everyone told her to sit down. And soon, the entire courtroom would see what happens when you underestimate the voice of a daughter, determined to save her father. Before this story continues, pause for a moment and ask yourself, how far would you go for the people you love? This story will show you that courage doesn't come from titles or wealth. It comes from the heart. And if stories like this inspire you, subscribe now and stay until the very end. Because what Aaliyah does in this courtroom will not only change her father's life, it will shake the very foundations of justice itself. A sharp laugh broke the silence. It came from the prosecution's table, where a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit leaned back in his chair, oozing confidence. His name was Richard Whitman, one of the city's most feared prosecutors, and he loved every ounce of power that title gave him. He tapped his pen against the table with theatrical rhythm, then stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance, "with all due respect, we cannot waste this court's valuable time entertaining the fantasies of a child." He dragged out the word child as though it were the sharpest insult. A ripple of chuckles traveled through the courtroom. Richard Whitman wasn't just a prosecutor, he was a performer. Every case was his stage, and every trial was a show where he played the lead. He was undefeated, and he intended to keep it that way. Robert Johnson, just another poor man he would crush beneath his polished shoes. And Aaliyah, to him she was nothing more than a sideshow, an annoyance in the way of his flawless record. Whitman paced across the courtroom like a predator circling prey. "Let's not forget," he continued, addressing the jury with a smirk. "This case is about evidence. Facts, witnesses, and now we have a teenager trying to play lawyer. This isn't a fairy tale, it's the law." His words cut through the air like a blade, designed not only to dismiss Aaliyah but to humiliate her. He knew exactly how to make people doubt, how to twist perception until truth was buried beneath ridicule. Aaliyah's heart pounded in her chest. Every instinct told her to back down, to shrink under the weight of his voice. But then she glanced at her father. Robert sat shackled, his head low, yet his eyes met hers with something unspoken. Trust. He believed in her, even when no one else did. Whitman leaned closer to her, lowering his voice just enough for the courtroom to hear. "Do yourself a favor, young lady. Stay in school. This courtroom is no place for bedtime stories." Gasps erupted across the benches. Even some of the jurors shifted uncomfortably at his cruel dismissal. But arrogance was Richard Whitman's nature. He had been born into wealth, the son of a judge and a socialite. The world had opened doors for him long before he ever learned how to turn a knob. Every courtroom victory wasn't about serving justice, it was about feeding his ego, proving his superiority to men like him. Families like the Johnsons didn't matter. They weren't people. They were statistics, pawns in a game he always won. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the rising tension. "Mr. Whitman, you'll have your chance to present your case. For now, let the girl speak." Whitman smirked as he sank back into his chair, his confidence radiating. He didn't need to fight her yet. In his mind, the case was already over. What could a 16-year-old possibly do against the law? What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that the same girl he mocked would soon unravel. Everything he thought untouchable, his arrogance had blinded him, and it would be his undoing. The laughter and whispers in the courtroom faded, but Aaliyah's heart continued to pound like a drum. The weight of doubt pressed down on her from every angle. She could feel the mocking stares of lawyers in their polished suits and hear the faint scratching of reporters' pens as they prepared tomorrow's headlines. To everyone in that room, she was already defeated, but beneath the fear that tightened her chest, something stronger stirred, a force she had been quietly building for years. Because Aaliyah Johnson was not like everyone thought. Her life had been shaped by hardship. When she was just 10 years old, her mother passed away, leaving Robert Johnson to raise her alone. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. He was a mechanic, his hands scarred by years of hard labor, his clothes stained with grease. Yet, what he lacked in money, he gave in love. He worked late nights at the auto shop, but he always came home with enough energy to sit with Aaliyah at the kitchen table, guiding her through homework under the yellow glow of a single lamp. And every morning, Robert Johnson had a ritual, a cup of black coffee and a newspaper. He read every article, every headline, every fine print detail. At first, Aaliyah simply sat beside him, too young to understand. But soon, she began asking questions. Why did this happen? Who decides these things? How could something so unfair be allowed? Robert never pushed her curiosity aside. He encouraged it. Knowledge, he told her one morning, setting the paper down and meeting her eyes, is the one thing nobody can take from you. Those words sank deep into her soul. By her teenage years, Aaliyah's curiosity had grown into something far more serious. While other kids spent their nights scrolling on phones or watching TV, she sat hunched over a borrowed laptop, watching videos of courtroom trials. She studied how lawyers spoke, how evidence was presented, how arguments were won. She kept notebooks filled with observations, pages upon pages of notes about cases, strategies, and legal tricks. Sometimes, on Saturdays, she'd slip into the back of the county courthouse, quietly taking a seat where nobody noticed her. She would watch real trials, memorizing the flow of arguments, the rhythm of objections, the way truth could be hidden beneath performance. Her teachers never suspected. They thought she was simply a quiet, studious girl. But in reality, Aaliyah had been training for years, though she didn't know what for. Now, standing in this courtroom, she understood. The smirks of the lawyers didn't shake her. The whispers of the reporters didn't silence her. She wasn't just a desperate daughter. She was someone who had prepared for this very moment. Even if she hadn't known it at the time, she lifted her chin and addressed the court again, her voice steadier than before. I may not be a lawyer, but I've read every report, every witness statement, and something doesn't add up. The judge tilted his head, intrigued. Whitman rolled his eyes, pretending to be bored. This is a waste of time, he muttered loudly, making sure the jury heard. But a few jurors leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. Aaliyah continued, I've learned something important over the years. The truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. You just have to be willing to listen. The room grew quieter. Not laughter now, not mockery, just silence. Listening. Her father lifted his head, his tired eyes glimmering with hope. For the first time in weeks, he believed he might be seen. But Aaliyah wasn't ready to reveal everything. Not yet. She was patient. She knew better than to play all her cards at once, because tucked away in her backpack, beneath the folders she had laid out, was one final piece of evidence, one secret she had guarded carefully, something that would not only prove her father's innocence, but would shatter the prosecution's case completely. For now, she'll let the suspense build. Step by step, she would chip away at the lies. And soon, everyone in that courtroom, every lawyer, every juror, every reporter would learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate Aaliyah Johnson. The judge leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. Miss Johnson, he said, his voice calm but firm, you may proceed. But understand this, the courtroom is not a place for speculation. If you claim something doesn't add up, then show us. Aaliyah nodded, her heartbeat rattling in her chest. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a stack of folders, the same ones she had prepared late at night when no one believed she could do anything. The sound of paper shuffling echoed through the courtroom, and slowly, the atmosphere shifted. No one had expected her to come prepared. Richard Whitman smirked as though humoring a child, but there was something in his eyes, just a flicker that betrayed discomfort. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his tie. Confident the jury would dismiss whatever she presented, Aaliyah took a deep breath and began. The prosecution's key witness said they saw my father leaving the scene of the crime at exactly 9:45 p.m. But here, she held up a crumpled receipt. This shows my father was paying for groceries across town at 9:40. And if you compare this with the store's surveillance footage, which I personally requested, you'll see him standing at the register at that exact time. That store is at least 15 minutes away from the scene. Gasps spread across the room. Jurors exchanged glances, and even reporters leaned forward in their seats. Whitman shot to his feet. Objection. This is inadmissible. A child cannot introduce new evidence. The judge's eyebrows rose. Mr. Whitman, are you telling me you didn't check this store's surveillance footage? Whitman well, it wasn't necessary given the strength of the other evidence. The judge's voice sharpened. Or perhaps it was simply overlooked. Whitman sat down slowly, the smirk wiped from his face. The jury's eyes lingered on him, doubt beginning to creep in. Aaliyah steadied her trembling hands and pressed on. That's the thing about truth, she said, her voice gaining strength. It doesn't vanish just because someone chooses to ignore it. You just have to be willing to look for it. The courtroom was silent, every ear tuned to her words. She shuffled her papers and lifted another sheet. Now let's talk about the fingerprints. The prosecution said my father's fingerprints were found on the victim's car. That much is true. But what they didn't tell you is why. She turned toward the jury, her voice dropping lower, each word carrying weight. My father is a mechanic. People in this community bring him cars all the time, even ones that don't run. The victim's car was one of them. My father worked on it just 2 weeks before the crime. Of course his fingerprints were there. That's not evidence of guilt, it's evidence that he was doing his job. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded slowly, understanding. Others scribbled notes furiously. Robert Johnson lifted his head a little higher, pride flickering in his eyes. His daughter was standing where no one thought she belonged, and she was doing it with a brilliance no one expected. Whitman leapt to his feet again. Objection, Your Honor. This is pure manipulation. She's playing on emotions, not facts. But the judge leaned forward, his voice calm. Sometimes, Mr. Whitman, facts and emotions are not so easily separated. Continue, Miss Johnson. Aaliyah took a step closer to the jury box. Her voice trembled, but she did not falter. My father isn't perfect. He works long hours. He struggles to pay the bills. But he's not a criminal. He's a man who gave me everything he could, even when it wasn't much. And I will not stand by and watch him be destroyed because it was easier for someone to believe a lie than to search for the truth. Her voice cracked at the end. But it wasn't weakness, it was real. One juror dabbed tears from her eyes. Another leaned back, visibly unsettled. For the first time, the power in the courtroom shifted. The laughter was gone. The whispers silenced. People were listening. Whitman sat stiffly, his jaw tight. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The judge struck his gavel lightly. We will recess for 10 minutes. When we return, I expect clarity from the prosecution on these discrepancies. As the crowd shuffled out in murmurs, reporters whispered to each other. The girl might actually have a case. This changes everything. Robert turned to his daughter. His eyes were wet with pride. I don't know how you're doing this, he whispered, but you're stronger than I ever imagined. Aaliyah smiled faintly. I'm just fighting for the truth, Dad. The truth you always told me never to give up on, but deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Because hidden in her backpack, waiting for the right moment, was one last piece of evidence. One secret so powerful it would not only prove her father's innocence, but would flip the entire trial upside down. When the recess ended, the courtroom filled again, buzzing with restless energy. Reporters whispered hurriedly into their phones. Jurors exchanged uneasy glances, and the spectators leaned forward, eager to see what would happen next. For the first time in years, Richard Whitman looked unsettled. The judge banged his gavel. Court is back in session. Miss Johnson, do you have anything further to present? Aaliyah tightened her grip on her backpack straps. Her heart hammered inside her chest, but her gaze was steady. She stepped forward, her voice strong. Yes, Your Honor. I have one more thing, something I discovered myself. The room quieted instantly. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small flash drive. She held it high for everyone to see. This contains video footage, she said clearly. Footage that proves my father's innocence and exposes the real truth. Whitman jumped to his feet, his voice sharp. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. She cannot introduce digital evidence. It hasn't been authenticated. It hasn't been reviewed. The judge cut him off with a stern hand. Sit down, Mr. Whitman. If she claims this evidence is relevant, the court will see it. The bailiff took the flash drive and connected it to the courtroom monitor. The screen flickered to life with grainy black and white footage. Aaliyah's voice guided them. This comes from a traffic camera near the victim's house. I sent requests for days until I finally convinced an official to release it. What I found changes everything. The footage showed a car pulling up near the crime scene at 9:40 p.m. 5 minutes before Robert Johnson was supposedly seen there. The driver stepped out, his face illuminated by the headlights. Gasps spread through the room. It wasn't Robert Johnson, it was Marcus Ellison, the wealthy businessman, respected donor, and the prosecution's star witness. The very man who had pointed at Robert and sworn he was guilty. Whitman's face drained of color. This proves nothing. He could have been driving by. Aaliyah lifted her chin. Then let's look closer. She clicked to the next clip. The footage shifted to another traffic camera further down the street. Time-stamped 9:50 p.m., the exact time of the crime. There he was again, Marcus Ellison, fleeing the scene. And then, the final blow, a muffled audio recording played, captured by a neighbor's security system. Though the words weren't crystal clear, the voice was unmistakable. Marcus Ellison's voice, raised in anger, threatening the victim only hours before the crime took place. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Whitman shot up, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, this is inadmissible." "This is," the judge's voice boomed. "Silence, Mr. Whitman. This evidence is damning. Issue an immediate subpoena for Marcus Ellison. The integrity of this court demands it." Reporters scribbled furiously, their cameras flashing. "Teen exposes star witness." One of them muttered loud enough for the jury to hear. Robert Johnson's eyes brimmed with tears. He buried his face in his hands, overcome with relief. For the first time since his arrest, hope didn't feel like a dream, it felt real. The jury stared at Aaliyah in stunned silence. The girl they had dismissed as a child had just cracked the case wide open. The judge turned back to her. "Miss Johnson, how did you even find this?" Her voice softened. "Because I refused to give up. Everyone told me to stay quiet, to let the system handle it. But sometimes the system needs to be reminded that justice isn't about power, it's about truth." For a moment, the courtroom stood frozen, then the gallery erupted in applause. The gavel slammed again for order, but it didn't matter. The truth had spoken. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted completely. Richard Whitman, once untouchable, now sat trembling in the shadow of a 16-year-old girl he had mocked. His arrogance had blinded him, and now the truth had stripped him bare. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Cameras flashed like lightning, and whispers surged through the crowd. But at the center of it all sat Richard Whitman, frozen in his chair. For the first time in his career, the man who thrived on confidence and arrogance was speechless. His carefully polished image cracked. Sweat trickled down his temple as his hands fumbled with his notes, shuffling papers that no longer mattered. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." His piercing eyes locked onto Whitman. "Mr. Whitman, this evidence clearly discredits your star witness. Did you not review all available footage before presenting your case?" Whitman opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His throat tightened, his voice caught. His silence said everything. The judge leaned forward, his tone heavy with authority. "Your silence speaks louder than excuses. This court is not a place for half-truths and negligence. You built a case on weak foundations, and now it has collapsed." The jurors nodded grimly. The gallery murmured in agreement. Whitman tried to recover, forcing a brittle smile. "Your Honor, mistakes happen." Perhaps the judge cut him off sharply. "A mistake is forgetting to sign a page. A mistake is misplacing a document. What you have done is far more serious. You ignored evidence that could have cleared this man's name. That is not a mistake, it is misconduct." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A few reporters grinned, already writing tomorrow's headlines. One whispered, "The mighty Richard Whitman, destroyed by a teenager." The smirk that had lived permanently on Whitman's face was gone. His jaw tightened, his eyes darted around the room, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. For once, he was no longer the predator, he was the prey. The judge struck his gavel one final time. "This court hereby dismisses the charges against Robert Johnson, effective immediately. Furthermore, Mr. Whitman, your conduct will be reviewed by the Bar Association. Justice demands accountability, even from those who claim to uphold it." The words rang out like thunder. Whitman's shoulders slumped. His legacy, his pride, his untouchable reputation all crumbling in a single afternoon. He had mocked a girl for being too young, too small, too inexperienced. And that same girl had just brought him to his knees. It was a downfall not fueled by vengeance or anger, but by truth and courage. The very things Richard Whitman had underestimated. The sound of the gavel still echoed when the bailiff stepped forward and unlocked Robert Johnson's chains. The clink of the cuffs falling away was like music freedom itself. Aaliyah rushed into her father's arms, and he embraced her tightly. Tears streamed down both their faces, but these were tears of joy, not despair. "You did it, baby," Robert whispered, his voice trembling with pride. "You saved me." Aaliyah shook her head, smiling through her tears. "No, Daddy, we did it. You raised me to fight for what's right. I just used what you taught me." The gallery erupted in applause. Jurors stood, some clapping with genuine relief. Even the bailiff allowed himself a small smile. For the first time in weeks, the walls of justice echoed with hope. By evening, the story had spread across the city like wildfire. Headlines flashed on screens. "Teen exposes corruption in court." "Aaliyah Johnson in Umbless. Topples undefeated prosecutor. Justice prevails. Mechanic freed after daughter's courage." The world wasn't just interested in the case, it was inspired. Families who had long felt voiceless suddenly believed they could be heard. Teenagers dismissed as too young began to see themselves differently. People everywhere started asking, "If she could stand up to the system, why can't I?" Within weeks, leaders began calling for reforms. The city council launched a review into the district attorney's office. Judges ordered stricter evidence checks before trials. Community organizations invited Aaliyah to speak, to share her story, to inspire others. At one such event, standing before a packed room of neighbors, teachers, and students, Aaliyah's voice rang with newfound confidence. "I'm not special," she said. "I'm just someone who refused to stay silent when it mattered most." We all have that choice whether to let fear control us or to rise and demand truth. If a girl like me could do it, so can you. The audience erupted in cheers, many with tears in their eyes. Back at home, Robert's small auto shop became more than just a place to fix cars. Customers lined up not only for his skill, but to shake his hand, to thank the man whose daughter had reminded the world that justice still mattered. Neighbors who once doubted him now greeted him with respect. He carried himself differently now. His shoulders no longer bowed under shame but lifted with pride on Aaliyah. She went back to school, but she wasn't the same girl who had walked into that courtroom trembling. She was stronger, sharper. Her dream of becoming a lawyer no longer seemed impossible. Universities reached out, scholarships poured in, mentors appeared eager to help her walk the path she had already begun. But the greatest triumph wasn't in applause or headlines, it was in the quiet ripples of change. A boy whispering to his mother if she could fight for her dad, maybe I can fight for mine. A teenager telling her teacher, I want to study law. Just like Aaliyah, her victory didn't end at the courtroom door. It lived in the hearts of everyone who saw her courage and began to believe in their own. Aaliyah's fight wasn't just for her father's freedom. It was for every person who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or underestimated. And that fight had only just begun. Asterisk in the end. The trial of Robert Johnson was never just about one man's innocence. It was about something far greater, the reminder that truth, no matter how buried, has a way of rising. Aaliyah Johnson's courage showed the world that strength doesn't always come from titles, wealth, or age. Sometimes it looks like a 16-year-old girl, trembling yet unshaken, standing up for the person she loves most. Richard Whitman's downfall was more than the humiliation of an arrogant prosecutor. It was proof that arrogance and prejudice can only stand for so long. Lies may dominate for a time, but truth, persistent, patient, and powerful, always finds its way to the light. And Aaliyah's triumph wasn't just her father's freedom, it was a spark that lit up an entire community, inspiring change, reform, and hope. Her bravery reminded everyone watching that you don't have to be the strongest, the richest, or the oldest to make a difference. You just have to care enough to fight for what is right. So the next time you feel too small, too ordinary, too powerless, remember this: courage can move mountains. And sometimes, courage can even rewrite justice. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that remind us of the power of truth, love, and resilience. And don't forget to share this video. You never know who might need to hear it today.